Thanks, Marie. Good to see everybody. Glad we made the change from Friday at 2 o'clock to Thursday at 11. I think it just opens up people's Friday afternoons, and hopefully you've been able to already take in some of the good weather, and hopefully we'll get some more nice weather, especially on Fridays and over the weekends. We're lucky to have with us an old friend of mine, Joe Brennan, who is CEO and Executive Director of the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. I'm going to talk to Joe in a minute, but the way the agenda works is that I'm going to first share some updates, then ask other members of staff whether they have any updates. Then we're going to turn to Joe and ask him how we can better work with the business community and hear what the business community is thinking as we're trying to open up following the pandemic. I shouldn't say following, it's still a real problem. So let me give you a few updates. First of all, you should know that the governor and the commissioner are looking at reopening schools in the fall. There has been no firm decision on exactly how that would happen, but I know they're talking about it. One good thing that I know is happening, and we were told yesterday, is something that you folks have pushed us to encourage the state to do, and that is to coordinate the purchasing, the bulk purchasing of PPE. Obviously, we'd love them to support it with some money, but if not, at least the state should help coordinate it. And I know that the state is now talking to the RESCs about doing this. So our hope is there'll be less competition between school districts. We don't want anything to happen like what happened with the federal government, where we had 50 states and the federal government all trying to get masks. But we think this is a very good thing, and I'm glad we kept pushing for it. I know that in the paper today and other papers it is talked about the reopenings committee has been disbanded. There's a feeling with the governor and with others that most of this work can now be handed off to the particular departments. So obviously, SDE is going to work on education. Department of Public Health is going to work on the health situation, and so that is going to be what happened. The reopening Connecticut Education Subcommittee that I'm on will continue meeting, but not as frequently. We'll keep you apprised of what's going on with the regional advisory teams. We still feel that we have to be and are glad to be conduits for the thinking that goes on at those meetings, and we're a conduit to pass it on to the State Department of Education, and also to provide you with as much information as we can. We know we have a meeting later in the day with the board members who are on the
It wasn't a rush. I hope you guys didn't go out.
I don't know who that was. Please
mute.
Please mute. The CARES Act. As a lot of you probably know, the State Department has not yet sent out applications to school districts to get this money. What seems to be happening behind the scenes, and I know it's affected other states as well, is that Betsy DeVos had her own way of figuring out how the money should be allocated, in particular more to private schools. However, the law has said that it should go mostly to the public schools. They're figuring it out, having to do with free and reduced lunch and breakfast. We don't know exactly what'll happen, but there are certainly concerns if we don't follow Betsy DeVos's guidelines. But the State Department is talking, and I know our legislators and congressmen are also talking with Betsy DeVos and the commissioner. We think we have a primary role of continuing to talk about the issues that are facing Connecticut, especially obviously our public schools. Don't be afraid to speak up if there's something we can help you with. We're on a lot of the calls, and certainly we have some influence. I'm not going to rate it, but some influence at SDE and with other organizations under which we're all regulated to some extent. We keep pushing for flexibility. We keep pushing for more money from the state to help us with all the costs. You should know that the study that was done by CASBO on masks and the costs was asked for by different states, including Rhode Island. I supplied them yesterday through the National Association. That is pretty much my update. I want to ask Patrice, Rebecca, Sheila, Nick, anyone from the staff who has anything to add.
Marianne, I can't find my iPencil.
I'm sorry to hear that, but we can't help you with that.
Bob, would you like me to mute?
Yes, please.
Okay. Nick, were you saying something?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Am I muted? Am I still muted, or am I okay now?
You're okay now.
Okay. Well, maybe. Anyway, I just wanted chairs to know that we've started scheduling in-person meetings toward the end of June and July, August. Seems like a long way off, but it's a time to start planning ahead. I mean, obviously all this will be dependent on whatever the current guidelines are at the time, but had a number of calls. So I just wanted, if any of you are interested in getting back on track with your board's professional development needs, please give us a call, and at least let's get something on the calendar. And depending on what happens, I mean, we've done some digitally. They seem to have been okay. I miss the in-person meetings. I'm sure you do too, because it's a whole different world. But I did want to just say, if you're thinking about it, or at least to plant the seed, let's start putting some dates on the calendar. Thanks.
Anybody else want to ask anything or suggest anything or give us something to think about? I know that the board chair listserv has been active, and I think that's great. And the more responses we get there when somebody asks the question, the more we can bring it in, analyze it, and see how we can help.
I have a quick question.
Sure, John.
I'm sorry if I may have missed this, but has there been any discussion about November convention delegate assembly?
We have had some discussions internally about it. No decision has been made yet. Certainly we will reach out not only to our board, but also to CAPS. We have to figure out what will happen with the exhibit hall. There is money involved in any of these decisions. Lisa, I don't see you, but I think I did before. Would you like to address anything on the convention at this point, or is it too early?
Right now, it is kind of early, but you should just know that we are looking at options to best produce and deliver quality content for all of you and all the board members. However, we want to make sure that we're doing so in a way that is most safe for everybody. So watch for information coming about that, but we still are intent on delivering quality professional development for all of you this fall.
For what it's worth, I attended a conference yesterday, national something, NCSD, for electric vehicles, electric school buses. It was 3 hours. They had a tight schedule. They kept to it very well. There were over 200 participants from 25 states across the country. Just a thought, I know we have bigger numbers and we have a much more robust schedule, but it might be something to think about in a modified way. And I'd be happy to work with you on that too, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, let's now turn it over to what board chairs asked us to do, and that is have a voice of the community. And this is a voice I have known for many years. We served together for many years on the Governor's Prevention Partnership. Joe is still there. He has been at CBIA for many years. He started in 1988 as a staff attorney, and now he's CEO and president, and he's a very strong voice, as is CBIA, for businesses. I was looking at their website this morning, and I realized that what a large percent of the membership you have, Joe, is actually very small businesses. And that sort of surprised me because we always think of it as the big businesses in Connecticut. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. I've given you some questions based on what we heard from our members over the last week. And at the end, just tell us and we'll open up things for questions. Thanks, Joe.
Hey, thank you, Bob. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you, Bob, and Patrice. Good to see you. And thanks for inviting me here. I'm really hoping I can learn from you folks today, because this is an issue. Some of the questions Bob wanted me to address, really haven't been at the forefront of a lot of my conversations with our members so far. But with some time to plan before the reopening of schools in the fall, and how we deal with workforce issues in the meantime, particularly around childcare and related things, summer programs, whatever it may be. There's a lot I can learn from you, and hopefully can partner with you going forward. Just a quick comment on our membership. As Bob referenced, the vast majority of our members are small businesses, just because there's only so many big ones in Connecticut. We've got about 5,000 members across the state, and there's only so many large companies. So our membership runs the gamut. We've got the, Aetnas and Hartfords and Travelers and Stanley Black & Deckers, all the big guys, but the vast majority of them, excuse me, have 50 or fewer employees. So a lot of our members have been open during this period of the general shutdown in Connecticut, because they were declared essential businesses back in March by the governor. Governor Lamont was somewhat more liberal than many other governors in deciding what was going to be declared an essential business, which I think was a great thing, because just some examples, in Connecticut, every manufacturing company was determined to be essential. So it could be open if they so chose, unlike New York and many other states. Also construction, it was shut down in a lot of states where it was allowed. Most construction was allowed to continue here. We wish we had more construction in Connecticut, but it's just an example of where we are a little different from other states. So even though our jobless numbers are just almost incomprehensible to me, and I'll get to those in a second, they're really better on a national scale than many other states, because we've kept more businesses open. You might have seen the jobs report that came out last week for the April numbers. We lost 266,000 jobs in Connecticut, which is, as I said, kind of an incomprehensible number. It wasn't surprising, knowing that we did shut a lot of businesses down, but at the same time, we track these job numbers every month, put out a press release after they're announced. And if we have a loss of 2,000 or 3,000 jobs in 1 month, that's, really concerning to us, and we comment on it. And then when you look going from that to 266,000, it's just overwhelming and hard to get your arms around. But now, as businesses are starting to reopen, those that were shut down, as you know, May 20th was the beginning of phase 1. And as I talk to our members, particularly the smaller companies, clearly getting their workers back in, their employees back in, is a big, big challenge for them. It's offset a little bit by the fact that the volume in their businesses is way down, so they don't need a full complement of their employees. But in trying to get people back into the workplace, there's several barriers. And I don't know if it's first in the list, but certainly childcare issues is a big deal. With schools being closed, as you know, many childcare centers being shut down for different reasons, employees have a really difficult time in managing through that and getting back into the workplace. Certainly fear is a factor. A lot of folks are just not ready to go back. They think it's a little too soon. It depends on a lot of factors, their proximity to their coworkers, their proximity to the general public, if it's a retail business or a restaurant, something like that. And then I don't know if you're hearing it, we're certainly hearing it on the private sector side about the $600 unemployment bonus that the federal government provides to people that are out on unemployment. I've heard, directly from employers who are hearing directly from their employees saying, no, I don't want to come back right now. I'm making more money being home with that $600 weekly bonus than I am if I go back to work. Now, they run the risk of losing their full-time job and they have to go find another one, but a lot of people are doing that. So employers are struggling with that a little bit, among many other factors in reopening. And I'm sure we'll hear some, similar things in phase 2 and phase 3 when those come about. The impact on the economy is pretty dramatic. I don't know if you saw the governor's press conference yesterday, but he threw out an awful lot of numbers on the overall impact on the economy and jobs. And again, not surprising because we have shut down so much of our economy, but on the other hand, still overwhelming when you look at our path forward. As far as directly, some of Bob's questions to me were around employers working with schools or their plans to work with schools on reopening and how shift schedules may change in the schools. We don't know what the school of the future is going to look like, nor do we really know what the employment situation is going to look like. So there's a lot of work to be done between now and the fall on that. And I think it's a great area for our organizations to partner. We've partnered on a lot of things in the past, and I think we need to continue to do that, but raise it up to another level because this is just so critical, not only to the children who are being educated, everybody that works in the school systems, but every employer out there has a lot riding on this also, as well as all their employees. So it's a critical issue going forward. As far as those that have reopened or were staying open, it was more just them kind of figuring out their own plans for dealing with their children relative to childcare. So I'm not aware of any particular model that has worked. I think it was probably most acute in the healthcare industry because of the hours that people had to work, and if the critical doctors, nurses, other support staff, first responders, if they had childcare issues, it was really problematic, obviously, because those people are beyond essential. They're the ones that absolutely had to be at work. So I think the hospitals and others probably have worked out systems that may have worked for them to provide childcare for their employees' kids. On the general private sector side, I'm not aware of any particular model that's been effective. I think a lot of people are just scrambling, like we've all done throughout this process, trying to figure out how we can best survive. Beyond that, I don't have a lot of specific information, but real interest in your thoughts on how to move forward. Maybe just a final comment, Bob, and then we can open up for discussion. I mentioned earlier that we put out a press release each month when we get the job numbers, and we did that last week. And instead of just kind of commenting on the devastation of seeing numbers like that, I also talked a little bit about that we really need, I think, a dramatic shift in the way the public sector and the private sector have to interact going forward. And it's not that we don't work well with government, we do. And I'm probably talking here more the legislature than anything else, but having spent 32 years working at the Capitol dealing with the legislature, 1 year seems like every other year in a lot of ways. And we just do battle over maybe in the big picture are small issues, important to some, but maybe not really affecting life as a whole here in Connecticut. And I think having gone through this pandemic, and as Bob said, continuing to go through it, we really need to think differently going forward. The one thing that would be tragic to me coming out of this, if we go back to the status quo and business as usual and how we operate. So partnerships are going to be more important than ever. I've always been a big partnership guy. I think they're incredibly important. Connecticut, unfortunately, has been very siloed over the years. Organizations and different sectors of the economy maybe not working as well together as they could. I've seen a real improvement in that over the last several years, but I think we have a long way to go. So I'm sincerely interested in discussing how we can survive this together, because if we try to solve it or survive it independently, I think we're all going to fail. And if we don't fail, we're not going to succeed as fully as we could if we can find ways to work together. So when you're talking about both the economy, the overall growth of our economy, and education, that's obvious about the connections, how important education's always been to the business community. But I don't think we've ever kind of cracked the nut on how we can do a better job than what we all do. And this, you always look at it as a crisis, as an opportunity. And I think this will give us an opportunity to get some fresh thinking going forward. Maybe put a lot of baggage that we've all dealt with over the years behind us, and come in with a clean new attitude on how we can all work together. And I'm not just talking CBIA and CABE. I'm really talking at a much larger level here between the private sector and the public sector, defined broadly, but certainly between our two organizations and my relationship with Bob and Patrice and others there. I think it gives us an opportunity to do some really cool stuff going forward. And this, I'm not going to be there forever, but I am going to be there for a little while longer, so we can at least get the process started about partnering together. But I really would like to learn from you what you see some of the biggest barriers are, and maybe more importantly, your suggestions on how our members, large and small, can help you in making your school districts successful when we get back to some sense of normalcy. So I'll stop there, Bob, and kind of open up for questions and, more importantly, discussion.
Thanks so much, Joe. And I should let all our members know that Joe has always been a very strong advocate for public education, and we've really appreciated it over the years. I don't.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
There's one thing I forgot. There's one thing I forgot to say, and I'll probably forget it if I leave it till the end.
Sure.
So if I could just jump back in for one quick second. We are doing a webinar next Thursday, June 4th, at noon, 12 to 1 p.m. And we're doing it in conjunction with Ready CT, the former Council on Education Reform. That's an affiliate of CBIA now. And it's on for the workforce, focusing on childcare issues and getting back to work. And I'm not sure who's going to be on that. Shannon Merriman from Ready CT is putting the speakers together. But I just throw that out. It'll be a free webinar, obviously. And if once we get it finalized with the speakers and I get information, I'll forward that on to Bob. And if any of you would like to participate in that, might be a good first step. And just kind of hearing from some folks, both in the private sector and the education sector, talking about how we're working through this problem with people trying to get back to work when they're having childcare issues and schools being closed. So just a heads up on that, and I'll get the information to Bob as soon as I have it. So sorry to interrupt you, Bob. I just wanted to get that in.
That's fine. That's fine, Joe. Thank you very much. So we have our first question. How flexible do you think the business community will be with their employees based on what schedule their children's school district is on in the fall? What do you think, Joe?
Well, I think it'll probably be a little bit across the board. Every employer is different from every other employer, what their needs are to get their product out the door, to get their service delivered, what their requirements will be on staffing in a brave new world that we're entering into. So I think it's kind of hard to predict. What I can tell you is every conversation I'm having with employers, it's always about employees and, how can I keep people safe? We started very early on in the pandemic talking just about cleanliness in the workplace and how you can keep the infection out. And then it moved into, what if somebody gets infected? How do I deal with it? And then it went into all kinds of HR issues. I want my people to stay whole as possible. Should I do layoffs or furloughs, or what can I do? And then when the Paycheck Protection Program came along, we advised them on how they can use that to keep their staff whole. And then just without going through all the details, it's always been about the employees and their health and safety and getting them back to work. And I always felt we had a very good model with manufacturers because they have been deemed essential and most of them open and operating. They've had to work through all these problems already. and we can use them as a kind of a laboratory on what has worked and what hasn't worked. I do know there's been tremendous flexibility in the manufacturing workforce. Some of it's driven by safety. Companies that may have only been one shift have gone to 2 shifts, or if companies were 2 shifts, they've gone to 3. With smaller shifts, keeping a half an hour or so gap in between the 2 so you don't have one shift arriving when another shift is leaving. So they've been very flexible with their own workforces around their employees. Some of that is driven also by their employees' difficulty in working normal hours because of childcare issues. So my guess is by the time we get to the fall, we'll all have more time to think about this and prepare for it a little bit. The more information we get from the school districts as far as what those different schedules may look like, the more time it gives us to prepare. So again, I can't tell you every employer is going to do the right thing and be incredibly flexible with every employee. They have demands from their suppliers and their customers and everybody else that they have to meet too. But I do think they'll be open-minded as much as reasonable to work with their employees, work with local school districts. It's going to be an interesting summer, kind of preparing for all this. Hopefully the virus will calm down a little bit in the summer and we can get back to a little bit more normal operating procedures so we can prepare for that eventuality in the fall. So that's the best I can tell you right now, is that I think employers will be very flexible, but they're also going to have tremendous demands given the fact their businesses have been down, their revenues have been down. They're all going to be trying to, get back to profitability. And so they're just going to have a really tough balancing act between that and the flexibility that they want to have with their employees. So that's the best I can tell you right now.
Bob, do you mind if I jump in with a quick question?
Sure, John.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Brennan. This is encouraging. I think there's a hierarchy of what can happen, and there are endless specifics, certainly, about thoughts that should be considered. But I think first and foremost, the most important sort of overarching principle would be to know that the business community is expresses through leadership a willingness to be bold and creative and innovative, and that we want to hear all ideas. Everything should be on the table. So philosophically, if that is the sort of starting point, it would be huge. Because I think what we're really talking, every individual business can do what they want. But that, I think there needs to be consistency, and really what that boils down to is structural change. And there's a European model. There are many models that we could follow that show the value of the partnership between the business community and educators and education, that will make for happier employees, for one thing, and more productive employees, but will be hugely different from what we're seeing and what we have seen in the past. So I would be thrilled and encouraged if that was what came out of all of this, is that the business world in Connecticut said, we're ready to make a huge shift for the good of the partnership. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, time will tell. It's easy for me to sit here today and say, yeah, we're all going to do a wonderful job in doing that. The proof will be in the pudding. But I just know from conversations I've had with the CEOs of the very largest companies in Connecticut, down to smaller companies, everybody understands it's just not going to be business as usual in the workplace, that things are going to change fairly dramatically in a lot of different ways. A lot of the large companies are in no rush to get people back into the office. They're all, technologically advanced and can work remotely, and they have all been surprised at the productivity levels being so high with so many people working remotely. So they're not going to be rushing people back into the workplace. Others are forced to, if you're in retail or restaurants, or others, obviously manufacturers need people in the plant. So again, a little hard to predict because we have such a diverse economy here and how it's all going to play out. But just personally, I think, as I said earlier, we have to use it as an opportunity to improve a lot of things in Connecticut. And the relationship between employers and employees is certainly an area that we all feel we need to have some improvement. So we'll do the best from our end, our bully pulpit, to to try to drive that change and forward thinking. And hopefully we'll get to a good place.
Thank you.
Oh, Joe, I've got another question. How do we as a group and with the private sector bridge the gap between schools being essential to getting the economy open again, not only because of childcare that we sort of provide as an added benefit of the public schools, but also the schools themselves and the districts are very big essential drivers of the economy. What we're seeing and what our members on this phone call are concerned about is that the tax increases we're seeing, if any, are very small. And we're also dealing with tax cuts. And we know that it's going to cost more to do more with less once again as we head into the fall. Any idea of what CBIA is doing on these issues or can do to help our board members?
Yeah, Bob, I can't tell you there's a lot happening right now just because we've been overwhelmed with dealing with our members and just trying to help them through these longer term issues. I've got my own thoughts, but I can't say there's a lot of tangible action right now. I do think as far as, the overall budget situation in the state of Connecticut, which obviously is going to be hugely impacted by this, a lot rides on how significantly the federal government will step up. Obviously, it's all taxpayer funded at the end of the day, but as you know, we've had, over $2 trillion already pumped back in one form or another. The House Democrats in Congress have a $3 trillion package, which has about $1 billion of it planned to go back to states as well as cities and towns. No grand compromise yet between Senate Republicans and House Democrats to get something through Congress. The folks I talked to in Washington think it'll be, late June, maybe into July before there's another package. But if there is significant resources going to the states to help with their budgets, that would be huge to get Connecticut in a position where we can keep services going and not have to overburden taxpayers, either individuals or businesses, too much. As you know, we've got the $2.5 billion in the rainy day fund. That's certainly a huge help. It's going to get us through a short term, but it's also going to disappear pretty quickly given the challenges that we have. But if we could supplement that with some significant resources from the federal government, that will make it a little bit easier. If that doesn't happen and we've got to close, $2 and $3 and $4 billion gaps over the next few years between trying to find some spending cuts or revenue increases, that's going to be, let's put it this way, I'm glad I'm retiring soon because I just can't imagine that the impact that either of those or even a combination of those two factors would have on the life here in Connecticut. So yeah, the budget issues that you mentioned, the impact that tax increases can have, it can help in some ways, but really hurt in other ways. We've seen that through some of the recent tax increases, brought in a lot less revenue than projected because people do make locational decisions based on a lot of factors, and the overall cost of living or cost of doing business in Connecticut is certainly one of those factors. So again, just being in the midst of this right now, I don't have any, grand ideas for you, but a willingness to listen and work it through together. There's no question that schools, it almost sounds ridiculous to say how important schools are. You folks know that, we know that. We got to keep the schools not just, financially viable, but thriving, being just great centers of learning and preparing the future workforce. We can't do that separately or argue about that. We've got to find a way to work collaboratively to make that happen. Business can't survive with good schools, and school systems won't survive without thriving businesses. We just won't have the revenues to support the school systems if we don't have a thriving economy. And we've all lived through this over the last 10 years or so. These are the challenges of not seeing the same growth in the state of Connecticut that we've seen in states across the country. We've seen some improvement of late, unfortunately, right before a pandemic hit. But, we've seen the strains on the school systems, and we've seen the strains when, the national economy is growing three times the rate as the Connecticut economy, and job growth nationally has been 3 times that of the Connecticut economy. That hurts everybody. So we've got to find that proper balance between supporting programs, whether it's in education or other areas, and allowing companies to thrive and succeed here. So, I hear you. Don't have any great solutions right now, but we're all going to be up to the challenge, I believe.
Thank you, Joe. And I'll just ask one more question, and then we'll have our conversation that Patrice will lead. And this may be a little out of your lane, as some might say, but do you have any feelings, or does the business community have any feelings about how we reopen in terms of alternate days, shifting schedules, or are you going to, sort of like the rest of us, see what the governor wants?
You're talking about schools, Bob?
Yes.
Yeah, no, again, companies have been overwhelmed just trying to survive right now. So I haven't had discussions with them about what a school design might be for the fall. No, like I said, I think that's something that's critical this summer, that we're all on the same page as far as that happens. I'm not even, excuse me, I'm not even sure where your discussions are with the governor's office right now and what the timing is on that planning. We would certainly like to be at the table and weigh in on how that may, coincide with changes that businesses are envisioning with their employee schedules on into the fall. But I don't have a lot of knowledge. I have no knowledge really of where that stands right now.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Joe, not only for coming today and doing your best to answer, and we will certainly provide you with any of the questions we didn't have a chance to ask. And I know you'll get back to us. And I just want to thank you for your friendship over the years. You've been great for public education. The work you've done as treasurer for many years at the Governor's Prevention Partnership has helped many, many children. And we thank you for that. And we thank you for being a friend to public education. Look forward to working with you as we move forward.
Well, great. Thanks for all that, Bob. Same goes back to you. And I was really sincere earlier about needing feedback. So let's keep the lines of communication open, and we'll help each other through this. So thanks again, and look forward to talking to you in the future.
And if there
Thank
are
you,
other
everybody.
Thanks, Joe. And please feel free to listen in on the rest of our discussion. Feel free to send me emails, and if you have more questions out there, and I'll make sure to get them to Joe. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Patrice for our discussion among the board chairs.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to jump off.
Thanks, Joe. This is the part, we have about 15 minutes left, and each week we try and make sure there's an opportunity for the board chairs on the call to share some of this information. You're very able to be supportive of each other, and sometimes your questions lead us to be able to provide resources to you in subsequent conversations. Your comments last week led to the invitation to Joe Brennan this morning, and your comments 2 weeks ago led us to set up the very successful opportunity for board chairs who have reopening committees in place in their districts to share with each other on a call this past Tuesday. So I open it up now for your questions, comments, and sharing.
Hi, this is Leslie from Watertown. I was wondering if board chairs could share how many are preparing to open extended year school or summer school.
Is anybody have plans to do that? Yeah, and I assume, Leslie, you mean in an in-person environment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we are. here in Old Saybrook, this is Tara Barrows. I know that it's something that we're still discussing, but I think that's something we're hoping to do, yes.
This is Chris Parkin in Reading. Right now, Reading, Easton, Region 9 are all planning to go remote for extended school year, if we can possibly do it. The costs and concerns from a staff perspective are still too high in Fairfield County.
Yeah, Darien, this is Tara Achman down in Darien. We are staying virtual for ESY unless there's a very, very specific case or need, but the health concerns are still, I would agree, too high here in Fairfield County to open.
This is Julie Osseray in Canton, and we are doing distance learning for July for ESY with the hope that by August, for students that need in-person remediation, we could start to do some in-person work in early August before school starts.
This is Michelle in Newtown, and we, similarly to the other Fairfield County districts that are speaking up, are doing a distance learning plan for the summer. Similarly, because of the public health concerns, the amount of infections still around, and the costs of trying to do what the State Department of Education has put out in terms of what we should be doing to hold schools safely.
This is Katrina Parkhill in New Canaan, and it's the same as what Michelle just said for Fairfield County. And I think, we haven't finalized that decision, but that's certainly where we're leaning. And I think, the priority seems to be just making sure that we can open our doors at the end of August for our fall. And that is, there's a lot to do in terms of getting our buildings ready and preparing for that. So I think people feel that that is the priority at this point.
This is Chris in Reading again. Can I ask sort of a related question, which is for folks who are remaining distance for ESY, whether you're making buildings available for municipal summer camps and whether that's different than in past years?
We are making buildings available for summer camps under the state guidance. They have, here in Darien we are, but there are additional fees that are being assessed to the municipality for cleaning. They also will need more space in Darien than they typically use. And so I know they're looking at the financial viability of camp, but we have opened it up to them under certain instances and increased expenses for them to ensure the facilities are clean as we try to get open for end of August.
This is Marian Manzo from Region 15 in Southbury and Middlebury. We are trying to do some in-person ESY this summer. I'm glad someone brought up the whole park and rec issue, because we're finding that the park and rec is going to be in the schools with a completely different set of rules than the kids in summer school have. Like, in other words, the kids in summer school have to wear masks, but the kids in the park and rec do not.
And we actually raised that issue in a discussion. We have a weekly call with the statewide education organizations, the commissioner and his senior staff, and we raised that issue of the different rules. The response was there was a feeling that because there are many members of the teaching population that are of an age that makes them particularly vulnerable, that the wearing of masks would be used for summer school and as a sort of test for how this will work when hopefully schools reopen in September. I'm not sure that answer is completely helpful, but we have raised that issue. And I also believe that the commissioner sent out a communication yesterday urging school districts, to the extent possible, to make their facilities available for other summer programs in the community as a way of dealing with the childcare issues, particularly for those parents that do need to return to work. I think Rebecca is going to put this question about the summer programs, whether distance or in person, out on the board chair listserv, so we can get some more input from people that aren't on the call today.
Absolutely. I was going to do that yesterday and then today, but I refrained because there was other chatter of good information going back, and I didn't want to step in the middle of that with additional questions. But it would be, you guys are great about responding. I know that you have a million emails and a lot of other things to work on. But instead of, I mean, I guess I'll send it out as well to see whether you'd rather have us do this as some sort of a, do these as surveys to be done, SurveyMonkey, or whether it works for you to respond this way. I want to get the most data, the most information possible so that we can get that back out to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Other issues, concerns, or successes?
So I'm going to step into the void just to sort of, it's not really an issue or concern, but I have been on a regular basis astounded at the professionalism, the planning capacity, the collaborative work between administration, students, faculty, parents, the community. So as we know, with the extremes that come from this time, it magnifies both ends of the spectrum. And I'm just looking at the solid plus side as something we should celebrate regularly and make sure that if people don't see it, they need to hear about it. It's really quite encouraging, and it's great to be a part of it.
That's a great comment, and I think was also echoed in Joe Brennan's comments about a desire to sort of build partnerships even when they might not have been there in the past, to use this as an opportunity. And the challenge in cases like yours will be to sustain that partnership and sense of collaboration as we hopefully move into a more normal mode of operation.
Patrice, can I ask a question of the group?
Sure.
Don't mute me this time.
That's Bill Marie's job.
Oh, okay. It takes a whole office, right? One of the things that I saw in the paper the other day in USA Today talked about many teachers being afraid to go back to school. Certainly those with immunity issues, those who are older. And the article said almost 20% of teachers, according to their survey, were not expecting to come back. What are you folks hearing out in the field? I've asked the question of Don Williams. He's not hearing that so much in Connecticut. Yes, there are concerns. Yes, there will be things we have to discuss. But he hasn't heard it that much. And I'm wondering what's happening at your level. Are you hearing things about teachers being concerned, and how concerned about reopening, and how do you expect to deal with these issues?
Comments?
This is Kristen Redding again. I think we haven't seen a rash of retirements or resignations at this point, but my expectation is if there becomes guidance that we're going to be in a distance learning posture for some indefinite period, that's going to push some faculty over the edge. As far as how we're going to manage a return to school vis-a-vis staff comfort levels, that's ultimately something that's going to have to involve a nuanced conversation with unions and treading lightly on all sides to make sure that we do what we need to have an educational program without causing unnecessary grief from an employee relations perspective.
Well, as my wife is retiring this year, that's 100% in this house. But I'm glad to hear that. From what I can tell, this has not become a really big issue yet, though we do, as Chris said, have to make people comfortable.
And Bob, point out that Megan's decision to retire was not related to the pandemic. It preceded that. Other comments and issues? There was a question posed about bulk purchasing of supplies, and we do continue to raise that issue. We raised it yesterday in our conversation with the commissioner, not just about the things we had been talking about, PPEs, but also cleaning supplies, also the possibility of some sort of statewide license for some of the learning platforms that you are using for distance learning. Did someone else have a comment?
This is Julie Osray in Canton. I'm curious to see, we are starting to have an issue with some of our teachers regarding live teaching over Google Meets versus just holding office hours type things and posting lessons. And it's actually turned into a union issue. I'm wondering if anyone else is getting any pushback from their teachers about teaching live versus just holding office hours and posting assignments.
I know that has been an issue that has arisen in some districts. Does anybody on this call have any experience with that?
Some of you
This is Tara Achman down in Darien again. We, for the most part, our union was supportive, and we've had online teaching at most levels in classrooms throughout the pandemic. We did have a small group of teachers that were concerned about it, but I will say the union was very helpful, and the district came up with kind of minimum expected guidelines for all teachers, and that seemed to solve the problem. Many are going far and above those minimum expectations, but we worked with the union to create that document, and I think it went a long way in ensuring that there was a similar type experience for all kids.
Would you be able to share that document? Perhaps if it's appropriate to share it, if you send it to Rebecca, then as we get requests from districts, would have it available?
Sure, let me check in with the super, because I will say
Exactly.
it was not the easiest document to create but I think given that it served us well, let me check in with Alan and see how comfortable he is sharing that.
Great, thank you.
We did get a similar document from Hartford after the Big Five spoke as well. So I think that there are examples for us out there. So to the extent that you can share it, that would be fantastic.
And I know some districts have talked about that they have had professional development available specifically for their teachers, and it was teachers supporting other teachers who were to bring along those teachers that were not comfortable doing the live virtual learning.
This is Michelle in Newtown. We've had similar pushback. And I think, it's been worked out for this year, but I think that we're hearing a lot of feedback from parents that they would like to see more online interaction if the distance learning is to continue next year. They understand, that this year was sort of we're thrown into this and we're doing the best we can. But so our re-entry committee includes a lot of the teachers in order to come to an agreement on what that distance learning might look like next year, and hopefully improve on what we've put in place for this year.
And to expand on that, I think if we have expectations of professionals with respect to technology, then we need to ensure that they are provided the proper tools. I know there are teachers, one of whom lives in my house, who has a piece of equipment that is not as functional as it needs to be. And that's the last thing they need as professionals, to have to stop and deal with tech issues because of outdated equipment or software. So that's something boards need to pay close attention to as well.
Good point. Any final thoughts? Any issues that you want to ask that we attempt to address in our call next week?
Sorry, this is Katie Balistraci from Guilford Board of Ed. I'm the Guilford Board of Ed chair. This is, sorry, going back a couple minutes to Bob's question regarding teachers as we think about the fall. My comment is not based on any feedback from our own teachers, but just as the superintendent and I start thinking about these issues, I think we have a concern, perhaps very obvious to those on this call, that if there are staggered approaches to teaching, if there are some remote and some home, that part of our issue is going to be the large number of teachers we have who have young children, who are then going to make decisions based on how this rolls out, right? So if they are somehow expected to be in the building teaching, but also have kids at home, that may be an untenable situation. So I think our concern is the inability to predict what our staffing issues are going to be without knowing what our plan is going to be, and that we're going to be running into these issues as we are, or just prior to rolling out plans. I don't have an answer to that problem right now, but just noting that that's one of our concerns.
And I see Clinton has posted that they are thinking about surveying their staff, students, and parents about issues around reopening, trying to get their perspectives, as well as nurture that sense of buy-in, which is important. And we all know that people's views will change. The experience of some of the countries in Europe that have opened schools, they had parent reaction initially. No, the families were not going to send their children. And within a few days or a week, they then became comfortable and started to send the children back to school. So those perceptions do obviously change over time and sometimes from day to day. With that, since it is noon, we will close out this weekly check-in. We look forward to talking to you again next Thursday morning at 11. But in the meantime, please feel free to email us and stay in touch. And we hope that you stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. See you later.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you next time.